Hey guys, Fit here, and I really wanted to make a video about my thoughts on why raiding no longer feels as epic as it used to. So let's go ahead and jump into it.
it it feels like Blizzard is moving into far more of a casual setting, which in of itself is not bad. It's no secret that WoW has lost subs recently, and they need to do something to boost it. The game, as it stood, was basically you can dedicate 40 hours a week to this game and get the full experience, or you can dedicate 10, which the average person will be able to do, and experience half of the content. Up until I started rating, I didn't even know what the stat hit did or expertise. Which was a huge problem because when I started rating, I was terrible because I didn't know I had a hit cap or an expertise cap. I basically just reforged into haste or gemmed into haste as it was.
Okay.
Um, but I feel like they've hit the Occam's razor at this point. They've basically gone too far in the other direction. Um, what was far too difficult to get into for a casual player is now far too easy to get into for the average player. I don't think looking for raid is necessarily a bad thing, and I do think it is kind of necessary for the longevity of WoW. Definitely, there's no way it's going to be able to be alive without it.
See, I have different thoughts on that on LFR. I think LFR has uh, killed part of the game off. The raiding experience I think has been ruined through LFR. I think there's way too many difficulties. LFR being one of them.
It's all good.
LFR was cool for Cataclysm then when it came out for Dragon Soul. I was, willing to try it out, see how I liked it. I quickly realized I didn't enjoy it, even though I must have ran LFR Dragon Soul like 100 something times because I always had
Yeah,
undergeared friends who are like, hey, you want to carry me through this?
they did a really good thing in Cataclysm that a lot of people kind of overlooked. They made it so you couldn't get the legendary weapon without going through at least normal mode
Right.
raid, which was a very good thing. In the moment, I was angry because all I had time for was LFR. But looking back, it was a very good thing. The oversaturation of legendaries at this point is ridiculous. Like the ring, the cloak didn't. I was glad I got it, but it doesn't feel special. Like
When everybody has it, it became
exactly,
mandatory.
almost.
I remember the very first time I actually raided. I played in BC because my brother got me into it, and all I did back then was PvP.
Mhm.
And then I quit for some while, came back towards the end of Wrath, and he got me into raiding, and I absolutely loved it. And one thing I loved about it was jumping into a 25 man and all the raid buffs. Like everybody had some sort of raid buff to contribute to the group,
Yeah,
so it felt like everybody played somewhat of an important role. Like even if you just brought like a little bit, a small tiny buff, whatever, it's like, oh, look, we have, 25 people here. Look at all the buffs I have. Like, I'd have rows of buffs. And I
yeah,
thought that was cool. It kind of added to the experience. They've kind of like watered that down
yeah,
throughout the years where like, because they didn't want you to have to, sit in trade chat or whatever. Like, oh, we have to have a shaman because, we don't have bloodlust or heroism. And then they gave that some more classes. And then once the raid buffs really watered down, there's only like 8 or 10 different ones.
yeah.
I remember raiding Highmaul, and so many classes had overlapping buffs that I was raiding Highmaul, and we had 12 hunters in the group because hunters were so powerful in Highmaul. They did so well, and
Yeah.
it's like we traded one thing for another. Like, so I feel
They.
like you kind of like traded one thing for another,
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a huge problem with
and
especially with the Legion pre-patch. Like, there's no buffs anymore, so why would you not have a group of 10 paladins as opposed to, you know, a varied group? If someone's doing enough DPS, you're gonna want 15 of those, or
well, why not?
18 of those. If someone's doing enough healing, you're gonna want 5 of those. And if one class is doing the best tanking, you're gonna want 2 of those. It's gonna turn into 18 hunters, 2 paladins, and 4 priests. Which I will sit here and I will defend LFR because not so much in Warlords, but I think we can kind of discount Warlords from everything as the outlier because it wasn't really very good um, in the end game. But like Pandaria and the end of Cataclysm, I was really into it. I very much looked forward to Tuesdays. I looked forward to going the raids because they weren't easy, but I could still get to them and I could still access them and feel like I was accomplishing something and beating the raid.
Right. So from like I have two thoughts on kind of like why they keep LFR around.
Hmm.
Or well, I mean, I guess three. And I think one of it's from like a developer standpoint. You want everybody to experience the content you make, which is a legitimate claim. You know, I can totally see that. Um, I feel like LFR is just so ridiculously easy though, because you can have people AFK, you can have one DPS carry, 17 other DPS,
I
and
run a
and to
healer.
me that just seems to like
Yeah.
take away from it a lot.
I run a healer for LFR, and I literally couldn't tell you any of the mechanics for Hellfire Citadel if you had a gun to my head.
Right. I remember like raiding with people and taking them through LFR and like showing them the fight, explaining it and whatnot, and then taking them into normal later and they'd completely bomb it even though they're like, oh yeah, no, I know what I'm doing in LFR. You're like, yeah, okay, I see that mechanic because they didn't know it would do that much damage. They
Yeah.
didn't know they had to move out of it that quickly. And I feel some people do learn mechanics, but a lot of people don't.
Yeah. LFR shouldn't be a click button get gear. It should be a padded room for you to practice the raid in, while at the same time gearing up for the actual raid.
I've had friends go through LFR like no shit. Uh, they'll actually watch porn and jerk off while doing LFR, and
You
they
have weird friends though.
can't do that when you're doing heroic. They're not. I mean, once they outgear it, sure, but I don't know. I just don't like LFR. And my other thought is it's used as a catch-up system, right? Because you can just go in and AFK for gear.
Yeah.
But I feel like that makes dungeons, um,
Redundant.
yeah, well, you don't need to do dungeons, right? Because, the gear's not there, the item level wise. But then they introduced mythic dungeons. I was like, okay, I see what you're doing. I feel like, though, if they wanted to do a catch-up system, like in Wrath, there is, I want to say like 17 dungeons. I don't quite remember. And then you got badges, and you could use the badges to buy
Yeah.
essentially old raid gear item level wise. And I
Yeah.
felt like that was an okay catch up system.
Well, yeah. A,
Um,
a good catch up system is actually Tannin Jungle and the Timeless Isles. It did what it needed to do while still being fun and not redundant for players who are already raid geared.
mhm.
And it added to the longevity of the game, which a huge problem with Warlords and to an extent with Pandaria is the fact that there is an entire year of raid content, of one kind of raid content.
Mhm.
No one enjoys that.
See, here's a thing I also have. I know people that say they don't have time to raid, but then they sit in their garrison for like 5 fucking hours.
Yeah.
And it's like I mean, some people do have like really sporadic work schedules, so they can't have like a dedicated raid team. But there's also people who are just lazy and want the
Yeah.
items and equipment, and.
Tier of LFR, for all of its faults, did one thing really well, and that it's the gear doesn't look like raid gear. It just looks like crap you would get from a quest.
Also, you're more on like cosmetic appearances right now.
Yeah, like a huge part of why I liked raiding is because I slowly progressed my character into looking like a raider. One of the coolest things I've ever had in WoW is someone messaged me on my death night and said, "Wow, you must be really good at the game. You've got the entire tier of armor finished." That felt really good. But moving back onto like max level stuff and raiding, what would you do to fix the problem?
So there's quite a few things I would do. One thing I wanted to talk about is like all the different difficulties there are for raiding right now. I don't like it. I don't like LFR. I think if it's going to be used as a catch-up system, there's better ways to go about it. I feel like if you want people to experience your content, it really waters down the actual epic experience of raiding. And I feel like what they should just keep doing is when they're about to release a new raid, nerf the previous one, 30, 40, 50% if they want to. So, more casual players can just kind of like go in there and do whatever and, see the content. But I think there is, this certain epic feeling of going into raid back when it was like 10 and 25 man, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh dude, fuck, I killed that boss, and people are like, no shit, did you really? But now everybody sees it, everyone and their mother, so you could tell someone like, oh yeah, I killed blah 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 on heroic. They're like, well, I killed it on LFR. It's like, yeah, but I did heroic. Like, yeah, but I know the fight. Like, well, you don't really know the fight.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between LFR and heroic.
Brings the question of, well, why make them the same fights then? Why not just make it another dungeon if you're not gonna make it
Exactly.
basically the same
LFR is just
fight?
like a bigger dungeon. I don't like having LFR normal, heroic, and mythic. I barely like the idea of normal, heroic, and mythic as is. I think one huge problem I have with it is the whole flex thing of being able to rate it between 10 and 30 players on normal heroic, because there's always a magic number just like completely cheese the fight,
Yeah.
and I think it's harder to balance around that. Um, I actually haven't even done mythic despite once being a hardcore heroic raider, just
Yeah.
because I've had so many friends quit WoW who were raiders because it just kept getting watered down. Like you just didn't feel like you were really accomplishing anything. You didn't really feel, the epic experience. And that's not to say the boss fights aren't good. Like the mechanics aren't interesting. I think that's fine.
Yeah, some like Throne of Thunder, which is a raid I have never done on anything but LFR, is one of the best raids I have ever done. It's flavorful, all the mechanics are fun. There's not a single boss that is the one you're dreading,
So
and
here's one
it's
thing: Throne of Four Winds, right? I remember reading that back in
Cataclysm.
Cataclysm, and we were doing Heroic Valkyrie, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
Um, that was a very painful fight, and I can only imagine on LFR, like none of the shit would matter. You could stand anywhere, do whatever, and you would down it.
Well,
And I remember rating it, and we had our team split up into like 5 sections, and it was
oh,
really RNG dependent.
I
And
remember that.
after like the seventh wipe, I had the healer in my group say, I don't want to be on Fate's team anymore because we keep getting hit with shit. I'm like, yeah, because, it's my team. I just happen to be in the group, whatever.
I have worked that 40 hours a week where I don't have a set schedule, and sometimes I'm getting home at 3 o'clock, which is just peachy. Other times I'm not getting home until 11 o'clock at night. It, it makes it so I can't raid after work because even if I get a midnight raid team, well, sometimes I have to be up at 6 a.m. the next day, and I just can't do that.
Right, exactly. And
But at
see,
the same,
that's why I can think like, okay, LFR is nice for that scenario, but overall, I don't think that's necessarily the best for it.
yeah, but at the same time, I'm coming at it. We've raided together for a really long time. I know where you're coming from. I miss Wrath and raiding with you and that whole thing because it did feel great and it felt like you accomplished something. It also felt like a second job. And putting that much time into something is a little difficult to do for the average person.
Oh yeah,
With
I agree.
WoW's, oh yeah,
I stayed subbed for a really long time because of raiding, like the in content. That's what kept me going.
yeah,
Even though some raids were out for a really long time, I just
they were always fun to do because you could have
yeah.
a pug and you'd have different people and again different buffs and you'd have to do it a different way if you didn't have three paladins in your group. At this point, any raid I go into is going to be the same raid regardless of who's in there and what class
An interesting
comp we've
thing
got.
is that back in Wrath, when I first started raiding, I made a lot of friends through raiding that I still keep in contact today.
Yeah,
But as the expansions have gone on, I have made less and less really close friends through raiding,
and
just because they'll raid for a little bit and I don't really get to know them too much, and then they're gone because they
yeah,
get bored of the content. And I don't know if they're necessarily bored of the content or if they're just like not raiding doesn't feel as rewarding. Like you're still getting the gear, it just doesn't have that, I don't know, elitist appeal to it.
yeah. Everyone, whether or not they'd like to admit it, likes to feel better than other people, and that's kind of where WoW rating was getting its you know mass appeal. You could feel like you're better than someone just because your armor glowed a little bit more than theirs.
Yeah, I mean, I remember admiring people because of their armor. It's a little bit harder to do with transmog. You don't know
But
if they have like the best rating gear.
yeah,
I remember you used to be able to tell through health pools. You'd be like, wow, that guy's got a lot of health. He's probably geared, or their mana pool. Like, wow, that healer's got a fuck ton of mana.
yeah. And that's a huge problem. Right now, really the only way to tell how geared someone is stamina and DPS. Well, if I'm in a town and I'm running by someone, chances are I'm not going to see their DPS or really take a look at their health pool. So the only other way is armor, and with transmog, that totally kills it. But I friggin' love
I
transmog.
do
Like,
too. I'm not gonna hate on that. I'm not
no.
gonna say I mean it's harder to tell in a sense, and everyone has fixed mana pools, so you can only really gauge health anymore if you're looking at it.
Mhm.
And that's fine. That's not really a huge thing. I more conversations were started by admiring people in town
Yeah.
through their raid gear. Not as much anymore, but that's fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Is the gear that drops has a chance to roll a higher item level, like Mythic Warforged? Is
Yeah.
it Warforged
It's
Hellfire?
Warforged Baleful.
Yeah. So, and that's cool in a sense because it kind of makes you want to keep raiding.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a fucking pain in the ass to get best and slot, highest item level, all that shit. So I like the idea that you can upgrade gear with Valor. I think that's cool. Keep that. But I think bosses, raid bosses, um, should drop a special type of currency, a special type of badge, and you
Mhm.
get like, X amount of badges per boss killed. And like, let's say you get one badge per boss, right? When you get 10 badges, you can then buy an item that will turn any selected piece of gear you have that's raid quality into essentially Warforged. So it just bumps it up a little bit on top of you still being able to upgrade it with Valor.
Yeah.
That way you can, you're like, oh, this raider's, so fucking good, but he's just not getting Warforged shit. And we're giving him, like the first item that drops and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So he can work towards upgrading it. I think that would give raiders, on top of it being able to drop Warforged, so you might get lucky not have to upgrade that piece, but also have a way to upgrade it, but only let it drop, from normal or heroic raids.
Yeah.
So this is something I've never done, which
Sex. You set me up for it. I'm sorry.
my brother did it and he absolutely loved it, but it was getting attuned for raids.
Oh God. Oh yeah, I remember that.
See, I
They.
didn't actually. I played back then,
Mhm.
right? While he was getting attuned for Karazhan. I didn't raid. I only PvP back then. Um,
Oh,
casual, I know, whatever.
yeah.
But he loved it, and I remember raiding in Wrath with him, and I was asking about. It. I'm like, why don't they do this anymore? It seems really cool. It seems like a fun thing. You're going through all these dungeons. Then again, dungeons aren't becoming irrelevant if you have to go back through them to get attuned for
Mhm.
raids. And it's like, well, you have to attune all, so we'll just make it account wide.
Yeah.
People like theory crafting, they really do. It's interesting.
Yeah. A lot of people do, and one of the things about LFR, which you kind of touched on earlier, was that they want the content they've made to be seen. Make us have to attune to the raids again. That requires you to understand the lore a little bit better. Go through old raids or not old raids, old dungeons to get the stuff, as well as a quest chain. It separates the people who are actually going to focus on raiding from people who couldn't care less about it.
Right.
And at that point, you can leave LFR up and not have to get attuned to it. And that'll definitely help something because the people who actually want to do raids are going to go through that and they're going to feel a little bit better about themselves for doing it.
Some people might make the counter argument, well, you log on one night and you're one person short for a raid. Take Jimmy. Well, Jimmy's not attuned. Jimmy's probably not geared for it then.
Exactly. Like you know, if Jimmy's not attuned, chances are he's missing, his offhand weapon or his helmet or his necklace that really is going to separate his DPS from being good or not good enough. I don't know. I like LFR as an idea. I like that there's a padded room I can go and practice the raids in. I like that I don't have to commit to, 5 days a week being here at 6 o'clock with all of my gear and my mats and flasks to wipe 7 or 8 times. Then everyone say, all right, we'll see you all tomorrow without getting anything. It's
I get
fun to
that.
have.
I totally understand that and I see it, and that's why I'm like, I'm letting LFR kind of stay there. I just at the same time don't like it, but I see how it benefits so many people. So I can't be like, oh, we have to get rid of it or we're all gonna fucking die. Rah. If I had like full control over it, this is what I would do. I would take out LFR, right? I would go back to having normal and heroic 10 and 25 men. It had its flaws, but I think overall it was pretty good. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know, maybe change that up. Like that's not even like the biggest issue for me. Raid buffs. That really added an
I
epicness to it. I
I don't understand that change at all.
taken away so many buffs.
Taking away all buffs.
I
There's no
don't
buffs left in the game.